In today's video, I am going to show you how you can speed paint your heroes using enamel paints. Let's go. Hey there, hobby warriors. Welcome back to another episode of How I Paint Things. This will be the first in a series of episodes where I'm painting up the Kruleboyz side of my Dominion box. So I figured we'd start out with a bang, and the subject for the video is going to be the big boss on the Gnash Tooth. So now, as you can see, I have already primed the miniature using Desert Tan Vallejo polyurethane primer, and just to make things easier, I left the shield unglued. So now, what makes this video special is that we're going to be using enamel paints in order to speed up the process. So what this will allow us to do, we will paint all of our base coats and our highlights using standard acrylics, but then we're going to go ahead and apply enamel washes in order to give us all of that depth in the recesses rather of the model. And overall, this is a huge time saver because enamels are very, very, very easy to work with in comparison to acrylics. They're actually very similar to oils. So to get started, what we're going to do is actually start painting the inner parts of the model first, so that if we happen to have any spillover, we don't need to worry about touching that up because we're just going to be painting other colors onto those surfaces. So what I mean by that would be like the wooden twine harness that's holding the Gnash Tooth's armor and the saddle in place. That's a great first thing to paint, because then when we go back to paint the skin, we'll be covering up any mistakes that we may have made. What I am actually going to start with, though, is not that twine. We are going to get started on the robes and the draping skin that's hanging off of the side of the model. And now what I'm going to do with that is I'm painting this as sort of rotting flesh. So I've got three main colors I'm going to use. This basic skin tone by Vallejo, model color. I've also got Army Painter zombie skin. And I've got Drake Tooth, also by Army Painter. And what I'm going to do is all of these bits of the cloth are actually cut into sewn together segments. And I'm going to paint each segment in a different color such that no two bordering segments are the same color. So it's going to give it this really patchwork, grisly look and feel, as if it was made from skins from different victims. So we're going to go ahead and get my wet palette ready, and we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so I've got my wet palette here, got everything ready. We've got the Vallejo basic skin tone right there, then we've got the zombie skin, and then we've got the Drake Tooth right here at the bottom. So we're just going to go ahead, and I've already wet my brush, get a little bit of water on the palette. And we're just going to start applying this to the model. Now you do want good coverage for all of this, so be prepared. It's probably going to take 2 coats. But we're just going to go ahead and apply these colors where it makes sense to. And also, as you're applying these, don't be afraid to mix them together to get some different flesh tones. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up this step, and I'll see you in a bit. Alright, so we've gone ahead and applied those various flesh tones and mixes to all of the parts of the model that have this flayed skin. And now what we're going to do is put a layer of Guilliman flesh over all of those areas just to tie them together, but we're still going to get subtle differences in tones depending on the underlying base layer. So let's go ahead and start applying this. I've already shaken the pot. We don't want the brush super overloaded. If there's some spillage, that's okay. But we really just want to try to keep it focused on all of that flayed flesh. And as you can see with the reddish brown tone of the contrast paint, just really ties all of that flesh together. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this up and show you what it looks like. Alright, so after the Guilliman flesh layer, this is what we've got. Now it's still a little bit wet, but if it looks like a plate full of lunch meat, you're on the right track. So what we're going to do now is let this dry, but then once it's done, I am going to dry brush a layer of zombie skin all over all of this flayed flesh, as well as the decapitated heads and the skulls, just to very quickly edge highlight those areas and lighten them up just a little bit. Alright, so let this dry, go ahead and hit those dry brush layers, and I'll be back to show you what it looks like. Alright, so we're back after the dry brushing, and as you can see, it just kind of helped cover up some of the pulling that we had with the Guilliman flesh. Also gave us some nice edge highlighting, and also on the heads gave the skin a nice sort of dead pallor. Alright, so up next we are going to dilute some wildwood with some contrast medium. We're going to go about 2 to 1, and we're going to go around the model and hit all of the wooden parts. So like this wooden twine that's sort of like being used as strapping. We're going to get the spear haft and the banner pole as well. So I'm going to go ahead and apply that. We'll be right back. Alright, so we're back. We have all of the wood and the twine on the model completed. So next we're going to work on the skin of the gnash tooth. Now for this, we're going to do a bit of wet blending on the model with 3 scale 75 colors. So our highlight tone is going to be Ancestral Blue. Our mid-tone will be Magic Blue. And then our shadow tone is going to be Remove Mana. And now, before we start actually putting paint on the model, I'm going to go ahead and pre-mix some transitory tones onto the wet palette so that we've got them ready. just a little bit more the mid-tone to the palette. And essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint an area with the mid-tone, and then while that paint's still wet, I will grab either the highlight or the shadow as appropriate and just blend the appropriate areas together. So just show you quickly what that looks like. We'll start on these hindquarters here. And now while this is still wet, grab some of that highlight tone and just kind of add that in on the raised bits. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up the rest of the skin, and then we'll be back. So here we are. I'm not quite finished with the skin of the gnash tooth, but I do want to mention, now this was my first time ever using the Scale 75 paints, the Instant Colors line. I was not aware that these are actually glaze consistency right out of the bottle. So this is actually taking tons of layers, and I'm not quite done yet, but as you can see, this does allow us to get some really nice transitions on the model. So for instance, right here at the tail, we have that really, really dark remove mana on the bristles of the hair, but we're able to transition that through all the way to this pale blue on the thigh. So I'm going to keep going ahead and applying layers where they need to go. But I did want to point that out, that these were really just glaze consistency straight out of the bottle, and I was not expecting that. I was expecting a standard acrylic paint that I'd be able to just do some quick wet blending. So I'm going to get back to it, and I'll show you what it looks like once it's done. Alright, so done with base coating the flesh of the gnash tooth, and next up we're going to move on and do the flesh of the Killaboss himself. Now I'm going to use Auric Flesh, and then I am going to also be highlighting at the same time by using a mix of Auric Flesh and Ivory. So on my palette, I've got the Auric Flesh, the Ivory, and then I've already pre-mixed that highlight tone. And I'm going to be working fast so that I'm able to blend the highlights while the paint is still wet. And I'm really only highlighting raised bits on the mob. So for instance, on this foot here, the majority of it's going to be Auric Flesh, but this raised bump for the ankle bone, for instance, will get a touch of that highlight color. So what that's going to look like is just getting that down, covering that whole area, and then very quickly putting my brush, grabbing a little bit of that highlight tone and applying it where I need it. Alright, so I'm going to crack on and I'll be back in a bit. Alright, so that's all of the Auric Flesh done. There's actually not that much visible. And I also use that same Auric Flesh color to go ahead and hit all of the greenery on the base. So next up, we are going to use Dawnstone, and we're just going to go ahead and finish off the basing elements that won't be covered later. So all of this brickwork we're going to go ahead and cover with this color. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. We'll be right back to show you how it looks. I only gave it one coat, and that's totally fine. When we apply the enamel washes later, that patchiness is actually going to work in our favor and give different varied tones to the brickwork. So now we're going to move on, and we're going to base coat all of the metallic areas on the model. So like the shoulder pauldrons for the gnash tooth and the breastplate and this headdress, we're going to go ahead and base coat that in rough iron from Army Painter. Now, this base coat, some armor pieces after this, we're going to apply bronze tones, and then other ones we're going to apply silver. But this rough iron will give us a good base color to work up from, so that we're not painting on top of the yellow primer. So I'm going to go ahead and get that started. Show you guys a little bit of what that's going to look like. So areas like this. Then we've also got these up here. So I'm going to go around the model, go ahead and get all of this coated, and I'll show you what it looks like when we're done. Okay, so we've gone ahead and base coated all of those metallic bits, and now we're going to pick out just some of these plates with Citadel Castellax Bronze, just to lighten it up a little bit and give it that bronzy color. So I'm going to go ahead and apply that, and then I'll show you what it looks like. Alright, so as you can see, we went ahead and applied that Castellax Bronze, lightened it up a little bit. While that's drying, I'm going to go ahead and hit the other metallic areas that we want to be silver with Citadel Ironbreaker. Get that in shot. And then once we have that applied, we're going to go back to those brass details, and we'll hit them with Runelord Brass. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and apply those two colors, and I'll be back in a bit. Alright, so now we've got all of those metallic areas nice and shiny. Now, the very last step, we're going to highlight all of these small circular studs on all of the brass bits, and we're going to use Canoptic Alloy to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go ahead and apply that, and I'll show you what it looks like after I'm done. So I forgot to mention in the previous clip, with that Canoptic Alloy, I was also going to do a little bit of edge highlighting. But now that finishes off all of the metallics. So we're almost done with the main body of the model. We just have a couple more details to take care of. Next up, we're going to use Contrast Blood Angels Red to go ahead and take care of the tassel on the spear. And then afterwards, we're going to dilute it with a little bit of contrast medium, and we're going to go ahead and trace that into the branding on the flesh flag, for lack of a better term, and on the brand on the gnash tooth's hip. And then I'll probably add a little bit of it as well to some of the severed heads, especially near puncture wounds, to simulate dried blood and bruising. So I'm going to go ahead and work through all of that, and I'll show you what it looks like in a moment. Okay, so here we are with the tassel done. We went ahead and added those glazes into the eye sockets and around where the cuts happened on these heads. just to add in a little bit of detail. Up next, we're going to hit all of the bone details on the model. So all of the claws on the gnash tooth, as well as the teeth, and we'll go ahead and hit the skull as well. And to do that, we're going to base it with Rhinox hide, and then we're going to layer Drake tooth on top of it. So I'll go ahead and do that, and I'll be right back. So with those claws and the teeth done, the last detail on the main body are just these straps that are on the Killaboss's shins. So I'm going to go ahead and hit those with snakebite leather contrast, and then we'll move on to painting the rest of the shield. Alright, so now as I've been going along, I've been painting the detail bits on the inside of the shield, but now we're going to work on the outside. And the very first step, I'm going to coat the whole shield with Blood Angel's Red contrast paint. And then moving on from there, we'll go ahead and paint the tongue pink. And I'm thinking the teeth and these tusks we'll probably do in a gray color. But I haven't made up my mind on that. So I'll go ahead and get the Blood Angel's Red down, and then we'll come back up to that. So while I was painting the Blood Angel's Red, decisions were made. So I went ahead and used Army Painter Pixie Pink on the tongue, just a couple of really thin glaze layers, and then for the tusk and the teeth, I went ahead and used Rough Iron again, and then layered on a little bit of, here it is, the Castellix Bronze. And then for the eyes, that was just Ironbreaker again. So I'm going to go ahead and let that dry completely. And then I am going to hit the grizzly bits hanging from the shield with Army Painter's Zombie Shader, which I am looking for to show you guys. Zombie Shader. So I'm going to hit all of the grizzly bits hanging from the shield with this, and then we'll go ahead and attach it to the Killaboss, and then after that we will go ahead and give it an all-over coat of satin varnish, and we'll be ready to start the enamel washing. Alright, so I am back. It is now actually a couple days later. I've coated the entire model in satin varnish, and then I gave it 2 days to cure. It didn't need a full 2 days to cure. I got busy yesterday. But it's very important that, one, when you're working with enamels, that you go ahead and varnish over your acrylics, but then two, the type of varnish that you use actually has an effect on how the enamels will interact with your piece. So the reason for this is that the 3 types of varnish, matte, satin, and gloss, have different texture characteristics. So gloss is completely flat, which is why it's so reflective and makes your model so shiny. Satin is a little less flat. It's still fairly flat, but there is some texture to it. And then matte varnish is actually really, really bumpy at a microscopic scale, and as light passes through it, it gets refracted, and that's why it kind of dulls down the look of your model. Now, what that means for enamels If your surface is perfectly smooth, say with a gloss varnish, that enamel is going to run all over the place, which that's actually a very useful property if you're doing something like panel lining, where you're trying to get that enamel paint like into a very, very tiny crevice on the mini. That's a great property to use. So you go ahead and you put your gloss varnish on before you enamel. With satin, since you do have a little bit of texture, it will still move easily, and it can still be removed easily, which is important. But it doesn't run quite as freely. So when you initially put it down, it will run, but not as much as gloss varnish. It's a little bit easier, I find, to control where the paint's going to go. Now, the enamel products that I am going to use are from Ammo by Meg. And now, what I'm going to do is, I have 3 of them. So there's this black wash, then I've got dark streak and grime, and this is actually a filter. It's not a wash, it's diluted even further. And in acrylic terms, this would be likened to a glaze. And this is brown for desert yellow. So now, what I'm going to do with this dark streak and grime, I'm going to treat these 3 kind of like a zenithal. So for this black wash, actually, first, I'm going to spray this underneath in the shadows of the model. And actually, it might be kind of hard to see on camera because the base is kind of in the way. There are actually bits of the model that I purposely left unpainted while I was painting the acrylics, because I knew they were going to be in the shadow and they can be covered up by this black wash. So it's kind of hard for you guys to see in there, but like the reverse side of these skin flaps, I didn't bother painting them. You're not going to see them when they're on the table. This black wash will cover up all of the yellow primer. Now, from a 45-degree angle, after we're done with the black wash, I'm going to go ahead and spray this dark streak and grime. It's a little bit lighter than the black wash. It's still very dark. But we'll spray it lightly at a 45-degree angle around the mini. And then from the top down, we're going to go ahead and use this brown for desert yellow filter. And then once all of that is on the model, we're going to gently remove it using cotton swabs. And when we remove it, we're not removing all of the paint from the model. What we're doing is removing most of it from the high points and then pushing it into the shadows. So let me go ahead and get this covered, and then I will show you how this works. Be back in a bit. Alright, so here we are after the enamel sprays. And I did want to reinforce, I'm not sure in the previous clip if I went over everything that I wanted to go over, but I did want to make sure that everyone understood that these enamel paints, just like oil paints, are solvent-based paints. So you thin them with white spirit or mineral spirits. Water won't really do anything for these. So if you're trying to clean brushes or you're cleaning out your airbrush, you need to use mineral or white spirits to get them clean. You need mineral or white spirits to thin these paints, and then because they are solvent based, you definitely want to protect yourself if you're airbrushing, and make sure you use some sort of respiratory protection, whether it's a simple face mask or if you use like an actual like heavy duty, air filter. You do not want enamel paint or white spirit in your lungs. That's bad. Please protect yourself. All right, so in the underside of the model, that's probably the best shot I can give you. So we went ahead and put a very thin layer, again, of the black wash. And as you can see, it's not thick enough to completely obscure the color. It's really just like, one or two layers of a glaze, so that you get a filter that ends up creating a shadow tone. Then from 45 degrees coming in, we went ahead and sprayed the dark streaking grime, which is a really, really dark green color. And there were some bits of the model where I focused more heavily. So like on the feet, and a little bit on the hindquarters up here. And then lastly, I went ahead with this brown for desert yellow and really just coated the whole top side of the miniature. That's a super thin paint, so I actually probably gave it about 3 coats to really build up the color. But now, as you go around, because we were using an airbrush, you could see there are parts of the model that, we didn't really necessarily want to get a lot of dark colors on. So for instance, the patchwork skin that's right here, this is really in a highlight area, so we're going to want to remove some of that enamel paint. So how you can do that, one of the nice properties of enamel paints is that they don't cure for a very long time. They're actually somewhere in the middle of acrylics and oils. Oils can take, if you were really heavy on your application, sometimes 2-3 days before they're fully cured. Usually if you're, using like really, really small amounts and thin layers, maybe 24 hours. Enamel paints are a little under 24 hours for them to fully cure. So when it's immediately been applied, you can actually just remove it with a dried cotton swab. Say you let it sit for a few hours, then all you have to do is dip your cotton swab in some white spirits, rub the excess off on a paper towel, and then that'll reactivate the paint and you'll be able to go ahead and swipe it off. So all I'm going to do right now is just show you what it looks like, because I just sprayed this a couple minutes ago. You just want to very lightly just rub, and that paint will literally come right off. See how it's picking up on the cotton swab already? So anywhere you didn't want it, you can just go ahead and just lightly rub it away. And this is what makes working with enamels so great, is this exact property. Any mistakes that you may have made, look at that hand right there. Kind of hard to get in a shot. That was completely covered with enamels a second ago. All I did was just wipe. I got my highlights back, and because the enamel paint is down in the crevices, I have my shadows. Super quick, super easy. Anyone can do this. So I'm going to go ahead and go around the model and remove what doesn't need to be there, and I'll show you what it looks like as soon as I'm done. Alright, so we are back. So I have removed the enamel paint from the highlight points where I wanted to retain the majority of my original color. So you can kind of see an example of that here on the hindquarters here, where it's going to get a lot of light. We still have that enamel paint like down in the folds of the skin. There you go. Yeah, we still got it in the folds of the skin, but from the high surfaces, we went ahead and removed it. Same thing up here on the draping skin. We've got our edge highlights back. And as you can see, because this is sitting in that solvent solution, it doesn't go away completely. You're probably, when you're, wiping it, maybe removing, 90% of the pigment, but there still is that fine layer, so you get really nice transitions from your shadow points. So say like right here, right next to this hand, to the rest of the hind quarter. So as you can also see, I went ahead and left the underside of the model just completely dark. All of that is in shadow. No one's really ever going to see it anyway. Like, you'd literally have to turn the model upside down. So I just went ahead and left that completely in shadow. And I'm really, really pleased with how it turned out. So now we're going to move on to basing. And I know some people have probably been screaming in their heads like, well, when you painted the scenic parts, why didn't you paint the ground texture that's on there as well? And the reason for that is I am going to base this with the Geek Gaming Scenics base ready range. I'm going to use this Mediterranean soil. Let me go ahead and open this up. And now, just for people wondering, it doesn't actually come in these containers. It comes in plastic bags that actually look like this. But they're not resealable. So I just got these cheap containers from IKEA to store them in. But as you can see, you have a bunch of different textures in here. You've got some sand. You've got like really, really shortcut grass. You've got rocks. Really, really everything you'd want on a miniatures base, all in one mix. And why this system is so great, and Luke over at Geek Gaming Scenics is a friggin' genius, is because all we need to do is slather that base in PVA glue, pour some of this base ready range on top of it, and our mini is based. Like, we don't have to worry about painting anything. All of our color and everything is already right in the mix. So all I'm going to do here is just select a old brush that I don't care about, preferably a bigger one, because I don't want this to take forever. So we got this cheap little watercolor brush that I actually may have stolen from my fiance, so no one tell her that, even though she's probably going to watch this video and find out. And literally, we're just going to put some dollops on the base and just spread them around. And you want this on quite thickly. I'm sorry, I'm doing this out of shot of the camera. Now, if you do end up having to use a good brush when working with PVA glue, you want to rinse it immediately when you're done, and then as soon as possible do a deep clean with some brush soap, maybe even potentially clean it with a solvent cleaner like white spirits, to make sure you get all that glue out as quickly as possible so it doesn't set. So I am almost done with this. There. That's pretty good coverage. So as you can see, we've got that on quite thickly. Alright, and now here comes the magic part, where we literally are just going to sprinkle this on the base. Alright, so I'm going to let that sit for just a second, give that glue a little bit of time to bite into all of that while I clean out my brushes. And then I will tap off the access and we will be ready for the final part of painting this miniature, which is just painting our base rim. So I will be back in a second. Alright, so there he is, all finished. I painted the base rim with Vallejo black surface primer like I do on most of my videos. Just very hard wearing, great coverage straight out of the bottle, very easy to use. I also added a couple of other details. I used blood for the blood god underneath the severed heads. And painted some in the eye sockets and the mouths, just to add a little bit of realism. And then I went ahead and added some Army Painter tufts to the base, just to spruce it up a bit. So what did you guys think? Let me know how you feel about the paint job down in the comments. Let me know if you've ever experimented with oils and enamel paints before. Let me know if this is something that you guys would like to try. Alright guys, thank you so much for sticking with me to the end of the video. If you like what we do here, please go ahead and like, comment, subscribe, share the video with a friend, and we'll see you in the next one. Slay the Grey, Hobby Warriors.